Can you give financial advice without a license? The answer is yes and no. It depends. But let's dig in what the difference is right now. Can you give financial advice without a license? Do you actually need a certain license to do financial advice? Or is there some advice you can give that doesn't require a license? This is something I have personal experience with. And there are times that, yes, you do need a license, but there's a lot of times you don't. But there's a very fine line between those two. And I want to kind of describe in detail what that actually is. All right, so first, let's talk about financial advice. Anybody can give you financial advice. Let's be honest, right? I mean, your crappy brother-in-law can give you financial advice. You know who they are. You know their name. I know you do. But anybody can give you financial advice. I can give you financial advice, right? Even though I have some licenses, I still could give you any advice I want. And the truth is, in this TikTok, Instagram world, there's lots of people giving financial advice that really shouldn't be. But the truth is, you do not need a license to give general financial advice. Now, if you are trying to offer specific advice, especially if it deals with certain kind of investments, specifically if you're offering those investments, then yes, you do need a license. So for example, I still hold right now a life and health insurance license. I can actually give advice and help people design and create their infinite banking or their whole life insurance policies. I can do that. I have a license to actually do that. Now, if somebody else said, hey, I'm going to help you set up a policy, I don't have a life insurance license, that's illegal. They cannot do it. They can't even be compensated to be able to set something like that up, right? So you do need a license for those kind of things. Now, in the past, when I used to be the traditional mainstream financial advisor, back then, over 20 years ago, I also had a Series 6 and a Series 63 license, which means I basically could sell you mutual funds, right? Series 6 was for the mutual funds and the securities investments. 63 was the ethics that kind of went with that. And so you had to have that one at least. Some people have a Series 65, some have a Series 7, which is individual stocks and things of that nature. There's a lot of things you could have in this capacity, right? And there's CFPs and things of that nature, like all kinds of licenses. But most of the time, these are licenses to sell, not licenses to give advice, but to sell you. Now, someone might argue with me and say, well, a certified financial planner can give good advice, in a sense, have a lot more leniency in what they advise. That's true. You can have an investment advisor or an RIA, registered investment advisor, that can specifically say, hey, you can go put your money in XYZ mutual fund. They could say, go put your money here. Now, they could advise you and give you that kind of information. Now, I personally could not say, hey, go put your money in the S&P 500. I cannot say, you go put your money and do this. One, I don't know who you are. So even from that standpoint, I can't give advice because your situation is different from the next person that's going to watch this video, and that's different from the person that's going to watch it after that. So I can't give blanket advice anyways, and I hate it when people give really blanket advice that's so specific for certain people. But on top of that is, if I were to try to give you advice, like even one-on-one, if I were to make a recommendation, I would need to have a license for that specific thing, especially if that recommendation deals with certain kinds of investments that are regulated by securities and things like that, the SEC. And so as a result, yes, you do need a license for those kind of things. So you need a license to, one, give very specific advice. Even if someone says, I have a 401k, where can I put my money, right? I cannot legally anymore, because I dropped my securities licenses, I cannot say, you should go invest in these funds. Now, on the other hand, if someone says, hey, Chris, what could I do with my 401k? I was like, well, there's lots of various investment options. You've got options like money market accounts, you got bond accounts and treasuries, and then you even got things that are like fixed income, and you've got some medium range stuff that might be equity based, but it might have some more diversification, more medium risk. You might have some that are more high risk. You might have international equities and things like that. But notice, I'm just telling you what's available, but I'm not telling you what to do. Now, if someone says, how do I make sure I don't lose money? I'm like, well, you can lose money in anything. The only way to not lose money is there's a cash. You can hold it in cash. You won't lose money there. You shouldn't, at least. There's money markets, bonds. You might, there's still a risk, but there's less risk than like stocks or equities or international stocks. But at the end of the day, I can't say you should go put your money there, right? Someone with a license, securities license, could say, all right, if you want to take less risk, go ahead and just put your money in these funds right here. In fact, let's split up this percentage, and they might even have you take a risk assessment or whatever, just to say, well, here's what it should be, based on your risk profile. Here's what percentage should go where, right? I wouldn't do that. Personally, I wouldn't do that, because I tell my clients all the time, hey, I'm not giving you investment advice, and then even then, I don't often talk about mutual funds that much anyways, because I don't really like them. I don't think mutual funds are that great. but they are an option. I talk more about the alternative investment space like real estate investments and things like that. And even then, I still don't say, go put your money here. I won't do that. I won't cross that line. But if I had like registered investment advisor licenses and other licenses, I could actually go do something more along those lines if I want to be that specific. I just don't feel a need to, because it's better for me to educate our clients, help them be wiser stewards of their money. And that comes back to this whole point of, what's good advice, what's not, right? And do, and of course, do you need a license to give this advice? Well, the truth is no, anybody can give advice, but be aware that if you give very specific advice, especially investment advice, you're saying this is where you put your money, do this. And even worse, if you get compensated for giving that advice, then you are exposing yourself to very high risk. That could lead to fines, possible jail time, and everything else. I actually watched some very high-profile financial advisors that did have various licenses. Even though they were licensed, still they gave specific advice that would go into put their money in certain things that became Ponzi schemes and things like that. And eventually, because of lawsuits and whatnot, they lost their licenses. So be very, very careful that even if you're yourself are considering getting a license, no, that does not protect you fully. You can still be sued. You can still be liable and at risk. And this is again why I teach people more about here's this kind of situations, here are the things you can do with your money. We even try to get pretty specific, especially like where does money go and what are the best uses of it. But we never say you should do that investment. And especially we don't say, here, do this investment because we get paid off of it. And by the way, we would never say that anyways, but even if we were getting paid, obviously that's not a thing to say. Even if we aren't getting paid, which of course we don't. We don't like to get paid on those kind of things because we don't want to be that liable for that kind of risk. We want to give more advice that's really just more catered to the person, helping them versus what fills our pocketbook, right? That's why we actually just charge consulting fees. We charge them really as a coaching program, helping people one-on-one figure out how do they figure out what investments to do, even kind of investment profile and things like that. But more in the alternative investment space versus in mutual funds. So we stay away from the mutual funds and stuff, even though that's a big topic of conversation for people because they're usually coming out of mutual funds. But we're not saying, hey, go sell those mutual funds, which would actually put me in high risk. So at the end of the day, this is what it really comes down to. Do you need a license? It depends. If you're offering investments, then yeah, even people that are investors, even in the real estate space, might need to have somebody on their team that actually has a license to offer certain things because they're being monitored by securities, because maybe they offer a syndication, like a fund or something like that. And so whether you need a license or not, the best thing to do is consult, someone that's like a securities attorney, someone of that nature to see if you need a license for something. I would talk to my securities attorney, actually talked to two of them recently, just to get two different opinions to say, hey, what point do I need to have this license or not? And of course, the ruling came back, the opinion came back saying you could get a license, but as long as you don't do X, Y, Z, you don't do it. Like I explained earlier, if you're not pitching certain things. Now, because we do offer insurance, of course, I have to have an insurance license, especially because we earn money off of that. But other than that, we don't try to do that kind of thing, right? But here's what it comes down to, right? Is understand that, licensing, even if you're trying to take this advice, having a license doesn't make you any smarter. That's the one thing I learned early on, is that just because I had a license, it didn't make me more intelligent. It didn't make me a better investor. Having the license really just gave me a license to sell. And that's really what it was about. It's like it gave me really permission to sell things and offer very specific advice, but it didn't necessarily mean that my clients would make money. In fact, in many cases, they didn't. I made money because I offered that advice, but they didn't always make money. And that's something you got to be very, very careful about, is that just having a license does not make you any smarter. It doesn't, just because you pass a test because you had to cram for it, and then you just have to take some continuing education once every couple of years, does not make you an expert. And I know this firsthand. I have learned much more quitting being a financial advisor, becoming an anti-financial advisor of sorts. I learned a lot more after that period of time than I did as a financial advisor, because I learned from real life experience what works. So financial advice that I give today is stuff that I've learned in many cases after I quit being a financial advisor, after I stopped drinking their Kool-Aid and being brainwashed by them about what they consider to be best advice, which of course my training came from financial institutions. And those financial institutions are the ones that pay us. And they're the ones that actually control the media, and they do all the advertising, right? And so all that stuff, I realized I was just a pawn in their bigger game to make more money for the Fidelities and the Merrill Lynches and all those kind of companies in the world, right? That's how They essentially get all this advice out there. And yes, a lot of them, because they sell products, financial products, that's what they call them, you need a license to sell those products. But to give it financial advice or to receive financial advice, the person doesn't necessarily need it. I just like to look for people, if they're going to give me advice, who's got the wisdom that they've gained, who's actually been able to actually not just accomplish what I've been trying to accomplish, but they're still accomplishing it today. They actually are still able to get their strategies and their principles to work even right now. That's why I always go by that philosophy you heard me say before. Been there, done that, still doing it today. That's the advice I look for, and that's the advice I like to give, is the stuff that I've actually done. I had a friend back in the day when I was 20 years old. It was a roommate. He said, whenever I try to make up an answer, it was BSing an answer. He said, "Chris, you don't know. Don't go where you don't know," right? And that's my advice to you, is don't go where you don't know, right? If you're going to give advice on something you actually have experience in, not like, "Hey, I bought Bitcoin last year and I made money." No, that's not considered experience or really good advice. I recommend giving advice on something that you've actually gained real wisdom over time. Use that advice, or even just say, "Hey, here's what worked for me, but it may not work. In fact, I could be wrong next year," or whatever it might be. Great. Give that kind of honest feedback or advice and just say, "This is what I do know. Here's somebody else who knows that, who's been further down the road. Maybe follow them." So that's the kind of advice I like to do too. Now, if you would like to get more advice on this, I definitely invite you to subscribe to this channel, learn more, because there's a whole another rabbit hole, especially if you go to moneyripples.com to learn today.